wanted to show the amount of play that's in this Spur Gear. And so as you're looking at this, see how close I can get. That's about as close as I can get to see the part number on the motor. What you can see is that there's an encoder on the back of the motor here. That's actually your position information, your right ascension. And there's also a wheel with a slot in it, which is your directly on the RA axis. That's for your periodic error correction. Then you have the two limit switches. And what you can see here is that they're in two different tracks. So there's the end stop in one direction. And if I come around here, I'm going to have to swing to the outside. What you see here is at the bottom limit switch, here's your home. So the bottom limit switch triggers on that sensor. And then you come around here, and there's your other stop. And so the way this works, it's actually a nice design. You know which side of the home you're on by whether or not this is on. So rather than the home being a temporary thing, it's either an on or an off. And so if the switch is on, if it's closed, then you know you've got to go east to get off of it, or counterclockwise. Could be west if you're in the southern hemisphere. But it knows which way it has to turn to get off that limit, and in either case. So since this thing only can turn just over half a turn, that's an easy way to handle that. And so we'll come over here, get a look at the Spur Gear. Part of what I wanted to inspect on this, and I'm going to run it through the positions, was just how clean my gear looks. And unfortunately I can't easily do this from here, so I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to attempt to seek the other side relatively slowly, and we'll watch it move. Alright, I am having to do this from across the room, but hopefully I can push the east button, because if I tell it to seek a target, it will do it at a fast slew rate. Alright, so here we're running at rate 7. This is rate 7, and you hear some of the grinding-ish sounds that bother me about this. I'm suspecting, I think inside that Pitman motor there, it's another small gearbox. So I'm kind of suspecting that that's that smaller gearbox that's actually making the occasional grinding sounds that we hear. So whether that means it's got a bad gear inside this box, unfortunately I don't think that that's going to be serviceable. Certainly the large gears that I can get to, and looking at the RA, and we'll stay focused on it, the worm gear, that all looks good. Arm is starting to get hit by the counterweight here, so that's making this a little tough image from this side. Again, whatever's making the noise, I'm pretty sure is in that motor there. This all looks clean enough. I don't see a loose set screw or anything, although I'll double check that. But yes, I fear that's the Pitman motor. And the question, if I had a high-speed enough camera, the What I'd be curious would be whether or not it was possible to tell that there's a jump to the gear when that is happening. I'm going to try slowing the speed down. Let's go down to speed 5. Now we're moving west at speed 5. You can hear it making those same little clicks. I don't know if I can hold this thing still enough. Problem is, sound means vibration, means something's moving that shouldn't be. Unfortunately, not possible, especially with my shaky hand and the odd angle I'm having to do this. Not really possible to tell if there's anything undesirable happening there. So, unless I want to just get in and try to tear apart that Pitman motor or just buy a new one and replace it, I don't know if that's problematic or not. Very repeatable though. I say that and then it changes pattern. But yeah, it's certainly happening at a higher gear ratio than what we're looking at here. It's almost happening every tooth worth of mesh here. All right, well, that's enough. That gives you an idea what's going on here.
So I took this video to attempt to show how my focus of my off-axis guider tends to give me somewhat oblong-shaped stars just due to being off the edge, and regardless of how I focus, I can't get there. However, what I discovered as I was watching this, you can see right there, was just one example, and that again, this is being associated with one of those clicks to the motor. So every time it clicks, the RA axis is vibrating pretty drastically in some cases. So I think my RA guiding problem is less about the fact that my stars are oblong. There's another good click. That one, there you go. So I think it's less about being an oblong star as much as it is the problem with the RA axis.
Okay, so given that this is actually, that popping is actually causing the image to waver pretty noticeably, I'm going to take this box off. Now I've got the cover loose because I pulled it earlier, but if you look here, what you've got are a set of Allen screws, and basically that holds this whole housing on. So once you've undone this and you take those off, that whole housing comes loose from the gear. As best I can tell anyway, that's the only way to get any of that stuff out. But there is one right in the middle I'm going to have to get to. So I'm going to work on getting all those out and get this box pulled off so that we can service the motor. So I went ahead and pulled the cover because, as you can see, the top screws of the cover actually go into the frame. So those were going to be problems had I left them in. And so now there's actually 4 screws on the back side. I've got all of those out, so I only have the 2 on each side left to pull, and that whole housing should come off. All right, so I was assuming that the motor was actually attached to that housing and that removing the housing would have taken the whole motor assembly off, because it certainly looked like that. But now that it's loose, no, it's just a little cast housing that holds a control board that then goes there. And those 2 little aluminum parts that were pouched out that didn't make a lot of sense, turns out it's because of these 2 nuts on the back side of whatever that mounting is. I'm assuming that is, you'll notice these 2 holes here that I had assumed were just part of the machining when they machined this out, that they overcut it. But I think that's actually to get to the other end of whatever screws are in there, which I hopefully won't have to mess with. To get the motor off, I'm going to have to pull the set screws on the gear and pull the screws that hold the motor. Then I get to find out whether or not I can actually disassemble that motor and find out what's going on inside it, or if I'm just going to have to replace the whole thing. So after pulling that gear with a 1.5mm Allen wrench, we're now faced with 3 Phillips screws. This is a case where it would have been really nice if they'd gone ahead and used Allen wrenches, because I think that would have been better. But now we pull those screws and we should be able to get the motor out. So after pulling those 3 screws, which actually came out very easily, we now have the motor assembly out. And now you can actually read what the part number is. And more importantly, there are 3 screws holding the end of that gear plate on, so I should be able to get into this gearbox and try to find out what's happening. Although the first thing I wanted to do was just rotate it and see if I could hear and I'm not actually hearing anything obvious there as I backdrive that whatever's grinding. So I do want to make sure that it's here and not on the other gear. So I'm going to have to test both of those. Well, now that's interesting. So the weight here where I'm at right now is forward. Actually, it's backwards, I should say. So notice this. So my problem may actually be in the instiction on the main shaft. That the bearing on the main shaft is a problem, and there's enough play. So you see how, because it's loaded in that direction, when I take that load off of this thing, it falls forward. It doesn't actually, here I'm driving uniformly. So while I couldn't see that with the motor, that may actually be my problem. So let me just post this on cloudy nights and get other people's opinion who may have seen this. But that is highly suspicious. Now, the obvious solution to that, presumably, is to change the balance so that it's really always loaded in one direction, and hopefully that would not happen. But you'd have to have enough out of balance to overcome the stiction problem.